Is that we have a lot of issues in this country that we need to deal with.
American pro football player Colin Kaepernick mounts an unusual protest against what he calls police brutality and racial injustice in the United States. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. To be clear, protests for and against a host of issues is nothing new in the United States, but what is unusual is when athletes, while on the field, choose to make their views known. So when American pro football player Colin Kaepernick decided not to stand for the playing of his country's national anthem, it drew widespread attention and controversy. For more on the Kaepernick protest, we begin in our newsroom with CCTV's Jim Spellman. And Jim, what's at the root of all this? What does Colin Kaepernick hope to accomplish?
Anand, he wants to use his position as a high-profile professional football player to draw attention to what he calls the oppression of not only black people in the United States, but of the oppression felt by many ethnic minorities here in the U.S. Before most professional sports games in the U.S., the national anthem, that's a song known as the Star-Spangled Banner, is played, and it's tradition that all players, coaches, and fans stand, sometimes put their hands over their hearts while looking at the American flag as the song plays. Instead, Kaepernick has sat on the bench or knelt while the song is played.
We have a lot of people that are oppressed. We have a lot of people that aren't treated equally, aren't given equal opportunities. Police brutality is a huge thing that needs to be addressed.
Some historians, by the way, interpret one of the verses of the Star-Spangled Banner as a defense of slavery. It's not common for professional athletes to take overtly political stances, but there is some precedent for this. In 1968, at the Mexico City Olympics, two American athletes, John Carlos and Tommy Smith, raised their gloved fists as they were awarded medals. They were protesting the oppression of blacks around the world and in the U.S. In the 1960s, Muhammad Ali refused to fight in Vietnam in protest of what he saw as U.S. imperialism and the treatment of African Americans. He was banned from the ring. As a result, more recently, some professional basketball players wore T-shirts supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. In all these cases, the athletes have used their public profile to bring attention to oppressed people in the U.S. and around the world. In doing so, they have faced the risk of losing support from their fans. Often, they face the risk of losing a lot of money as well from endorsements. Anand?
Right, and Jim, what's been the reaction so far?
Well, one of the things Kaepernick has said he wants to do is start a conversation about these issues. Certainly done that. Some of his fellow players have joined in the protests, either by kneeling during the anthem or raising their fists, echoing the Olympians from the 1960s. President Obama has expressed at least some support for Kaepernick.
He's exercising his constitutional right to make a statement. I think there's a long history of sports figures doing so. I think he cares about some real, legitimate issues that have to be talked about.
But Obama says he's concerned about using the national anthem and the flag as a way to protest because this is a symbol that means so much to many Americans, especially military families. Reaction amongst Kaepernick's fans, fellow players, the media has been mixed as well. Many people say they support his right to speak out, but they question his methods just like President Obama has. Colin Kaepernick says he means no harm to military members, but look, clearly a lot of people are supporting him. His jersey, Anand, is now the league's top seller.
Thanks, Jim. That's CCTV's Jim Spellman reporting from our newsroom. Well, there's much to talk about. Joining us here in Washington is David Steele. He's a writer for Sporting News and the co-author of Silent Gesture, the autobiography of former U.S. Olympian Tommy Smith. Also with us is radio talk show host and civil rights activist Joe Madison. And joining us from Mountain View, California is Harry Edwards. Back in 1968, he served as an advisor to U.S. Olympians John Carlos and Tommy Smith while writing his first book, The Revolt of the Black Athlete. He's currently Professor Emeritus of Sociology at the University of California at Berkeley. Gentlemen, thanks to all of you for joining us. Let's start out with Harry Edwards out at Mountain View, California. Let's talk about Colin Kaepernick. This has generated quite a bit of controversy. He said, "I'm not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color." Harry, no matter what one's opinion, has Kaepernick started a debate again that is long overdue?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that not only is it long overdue, but it is something that feeds directly into the environment, the highly hyper racial environment that we have in this country. Going back to some of the efforts by the NBA, for example, around the Donald Sterling situation, most certainly the Miami Heat wearing hoodies in the wake of the murder of Trayvon Martin. Then you look at the numbers of black men and children who have been shot by police officers and have it caught on camera right on up to this very day when the National Collegiate Athletic Association has pulled 7 tournaments out of North Carolina behind the transgender issue, which is another human rights issue in this country. So Colin is right in where he is dealing with these issues straight up, and he's not wrong for doing so.
And as I said, Harry, he's generated a lot of controversy. You're advising him. What are you telling him?
Well, I think the difference between a movement and a mob, the bridge between protest and progress is follow-through. So we're looking at some other things that will be done later on, such as barbershop conversations where athletes, him among them, will pay barbershops to give free haircuts to police officers and people from the community. I mean, it's very difficult to get animated and do a lot of hand flinging and one thing or another while somebody is cutting your hair, unless you want to get out of the chair looking like a clown. So they're going to have to talk to each other and then to provide a brunch afterwards to carry on those conversations. So there are some things that are being planned down on the ground to expand the conversation, and I think along with all of the talk that's going on, which he's been very successful at generating, this follow-through will help cement some of the effort that he's tried to put in place.
Joe, the protest is spreading. Other players have joined these protests during the national anthem. They're raising their fists or kneeling down. One would hope that there are consequences here, that these protests lead to something. Question is, who are the protests aimed at right now?
Well, the protests are aimed at all of us. I mean, you know, as I sit here and almost in awe of Harry Edwards, I mean, the only correction I'd make in his introduction is he is everybody's professor. He was my professor in 1968 because what he did resonated. And what people have to understand, this is not just resonating in the United States, but it's resonating globally. I had the opportunity to interview John Carlos, and one of the things that he said, this was not just about the United States. I think Professor Edwards would agree with this. This was a global protest. And understand what's happening. Just the other day, you had a high school football team that decided to take a knee during the playing of the national anthem. And a pastor who doubles as an announcer at this high school game said anybody that doesn't respect the national anthem should go over to the side and be shot by the military. The reality is that it's speaking nationally, globally, and the other reality is, and I read something James Baldwin once said, and that is, politically, the majority is usually wrong. It's the minority that usually is right and makes the changes that end up changing our society and our culture. And another great professor, Dr. Ron Walters, was once asked, what is the difference between a moment and a movement? What I appreciate about what Kaepernick has done is that he didn't have just a moment. He now has started a movement. And what everyone knows who has ever been part of a movement, the difference is, as the late Dr. Ron Walters said, the difference is sacrifice. Movements require sacrifice.
David, you co-authored the book Silent Gesture about Tommy Smith, who, with John Carlos, staged that protest at the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. That was 48 years ago. Yeah, we're fair to say that very little progress has been made in 48 years. We still see the same protests.
It is pretty remarkable that not only are the same problems present, but the athletes are using the same symbolism, which says a lot about the power of that protest.
Right.
And it says a lot about, obviously, Dr. Edwards as well, and what he put together in advance of those Olympic Games, understanding how powerful they would be. And now we know it's lasted more than a half century. To see that Colin Kaepernick began by sitting during the anthem, then he went on to kneeling, and now we saw this past weekend. On a weekend of this magnitude, not only was the opening weekend of the biggest sport in this country that has the global impact that it does, but also the anniversary of September 11th, to see so many athletes not just kneeling, but also raising their fists in the air. This happened game after game after game after game. So these, I mean, they literally were not born. Sometimes their parents weren't born back in 1968 when this happened. But the understanding of that gesture has carried on. It's been passed down to them, and it resonates with them, and so they continue to use it. But yeah, it's pretty sobering to realize that they have that athletes, or that everybody in the society is still facing the exact same issues that John Carlos and Tommy Smith were protesting against, that they were trying to galvanize a movement on the Olympic stage to make that change. And now here we are half a century later, and another big, gigantic stage like the NFL, we're facing the exact same problems and getting almost the identical backlash from death threats to questions about their patriotism.
Right.
Do they love this country? Leave this country if you don't like it. That whole thing. Everything to steer away from ever discussing actually solving the problems that they're protesting against.
People being called traitors.
Absolutely.
Harry, when we look at the protests right now, do you get the sense that someone is listening?
Of course they're listening. I mean, this is what all of the conversation is about. And what's really remarkable is that we're in the midst of a presidential election campaign, which is unprecedented in terms of the depths of swinery and pure pigism that has been expressed, particularly by one side. And over all of that noise, you can still hear Kaepernick and his cohorts making a statement about human rights in this country and some real issues that we should be looking at. While so many of our presidential candidates have been arguing about how big somebody's hand is, about some emails, about foundations and one thing or another, and this is not to denigrate both sides. That this is not an equivalency that's going on here. And just for the record, so that people understand where I'm coming from, I don't care about Hillary Clinton's health records. I mean, I'm going to vote for her largely because of the option. I don't care if they have to administer the oath of office to her while she's on life support. I think that we have to be real about this, and the fact that Kaepernick and his athlete cohorts can get a serious discussion going about issues of race and equality and justice and so forth over all of this swinery and piggishness that's being expressed sometimes about race is truly remarkable.